Once upon a time, in a faraway kingdom, lived a good king. He had 6 sons and a beloved daughter named Angelica. She was as kind and beautiful as the people of the kingdom dreamed their princess would be. Peaceful days didn't last long. The princess's mother went to heaven happy knowing she had such wonderful children. The king decided to marry again, and the new queen gave him a very unpleasant gift. She gave him a daughter Olga, which was as ugly as a slug, arrogant and nasty. When people looked at her, their mood turned as dark as a rainy sky. The time passed fast, and it came time for Angelica to marry. The king invited all the princes from the neighbor lands to choose a husband for his beloved daughter. Therefore, 2 unpleasant friends came to the queen. They were jealousy and anger. She hated her stepdaughter for being more attractive than her own daughter, and wanted to find the best husband for Olga. So she decided to trick Angelica. She called her and said, "Sweetheart, our maid just told me that your old nanny is very sick. She won't be here with us today." Angelica went pale and replied, "Oh, mother, I must see her." The queen waited for these words. An evil smile appeared on the queen's face. She sent Angelica to visit her old nanny that lived in a village on the other side of a dark forest. Then she went to her own daughter, dressed her nicely and sent her to meet the guests. The king noticed his beloved daughter's absence when Olga was about to charm the best prince. He went to the queen and asked her, "Where is Angelica?" And his wife gave him a sly answer, "She disobeyed you, my king. She didn't come to the ball. Perhaps she doesn't want to marry first." The king frowned but said nothing. Meanwhile, Angelica was going through the deep dark forest. Suddenly, she saw a hare stuck in the roots of a tree. Immediately, she bent down and helped the poor creature. The hare thanked her and said, "Don't go farther. There is a wizard who kidnaps all young girls and hides them in his cold dark cave." Angelica was terrified, but she remembered her old nanny who read her fairy tales during long rainy nights. "I can't go back," she said and continued her journey. The longer she walked, the darker the forest became, the more terrible the trees seemed, and the colder the air felt. Soon Angelica met a woodpecker. His long beak was stuck deeply in the wood, and he couldn't pull it out. Angelica set him free and he told her, "Don't go deep into a deep forest. There lives an evil wizard. He will hide you in a dark cave where you will be for ages without a chance to see the beauty of sunlight." Angelica was more scared than ever. But she remembered her old nanny and went farther. She came to a swamp and saw a drowning mole. He looked so nasty that even birds turned their back on him. He didn't have eyes. Instead, he had giant paws and sharp claws. Angelica looked at him in terror. She thought, how can anyone help such an ugly creature? But she felt pity for him. He didn't deserve to drown. She bent down to the mole and helped him out. The mole smiled a terrible smile and said, "I thank you for your kindness. Please don't go any farther." "I know about the wizard," sighed Angelica. "But my sick nanny lives on the other side of this forest. When we are together, she will feel joy again. As you know, happiness heals any sickness." The mole shook its head sadly and dived into a hole. The king's daughter sighed. She continued her journey and didn't notice how long she had been walking, and that it had grown dark. Suddenly, a terrible hunchback wizard appeared in front of her. He raised his magic staff, and it glowed red. Angelica couldn't breathe. The evil wizard was using his magic on her. She staggered back in terror, ready to face her fate, but at this very moment, a handsome elven prince revealed himself and killed the evil wizard. Angelica took a deep breath and thanked him for saving her life. "For a long time, I tried to save my forest from this villain, but he kept turning me into different animals every time. Only you did not hesitate to help even a mole and released me 3 times. The girl presented him a smile, and the elf's heart trembled. He fell in love with beautiful Angelica, and decided to take her to the house of her nanny. They visited the old woman, and the elf gave her a magic elixir, and she immediately recovered. Angelica returned to the palace together with the elven prince, and introduced him to her father. The king was so delighted that over time his daughter would become the queen of the elves, and unite the magical lands with her own. On the other hand, the queen turned green with envy. She wrung her hands and thought about how to take away such a groom from her stepdaughter, and marry Olga to him. She thought and thought, and an evil idea came to her mind. After a magnificent feast, the queen went to the crossroads and said magic words that a smart person would never say. "Wild wind, you fly and see. Wicked woman, bring to me." The wind arose and instantly brought a witch to the crossroads. The queen looked at her and got scared. The witch was so terrifying. Her teeth were sticking down to her knees, and her nails were scratching the ground. "Why did you disturb an old woman?" grumbled the witch. "Make my stepdaughter the ugliest girl," the queen ordered. The witch clenched her teeth, sniffed the air, and said, "Oh, but I can't. Your stepdaughter is kind, and goodness can never be ugly. However, I can make sure that she does not meet with anyone else on earth. Do the same to the king's sons, so my daughter becomes the heir. It's possible, but the price will be higher." The queen leaped for joy and agreed. At that moment, a terrible wind rose, flew into the palace, picked up Angelica and her brothers, carried them over the lands, and threw them into the cold water of the ocean. As soon as the princes touched the water, they turned into sea lions, and the princess turned into a harp seal. For a long time, they shouted, floundered in the water, until they realized what had happened. Suddenly, the youngest brother, who loved to read, said, "I know who can help us. The powerful Sea King can remove the spell. We became his subjects against our will. He can return us to the shore." "And where do we find the Sea King?" asked Angelica. "His palace is in the deepest depths of the ocean far away from here." The princess sighed and with her brother swam to look for the Sea King. Meanwhile, the elven prince learned that his bride was missing. He went to Angelica's father, and the queen was right there. "Well, one daughter is missing, but the other is here. We will marry you with Olga, and there is no need to grieve," said the queen. The prince looked at the royal daughter and thought that he would have to grieve all his life if he married such a girl. He bowed to the king and decided to go in search of his bride. Many times the moon and the sun exchanged positions in the sky before the sea lions and the harp seal, the royal children, reached the underwater palace of the Sea King. As they swam along a coral reef, they saw 6 beautiful mermaids anchored by corals and asking for help. The sea lion swam closer, and the youngest brother asked, "Why are you imprisoned, beautiful maidens?" And the mermaids answered, "We were the daughters of a human king, but the sea lord kidnapped us, turned us into mermaids, and keeps us here for his joy. Save us, kind sea lions. If we help you, we will remain in this form forever." "We are also the human children of a king," said the youngest brother. "We can't make the Sea King angry, for he alone can break the spell," sighed Angelica. She wiped a tear with a white flipper and said, "We can't leave these maidens in trouble. Let's help them." They broke the coral outgrowths with their tails, released the mermaids, and swam together away from the palace of the Sea King. Meanwhile, the elven prince had been looking for his bride on dry land. From city to city and from country to country, he traveled and could not find her. He had been looking for her for 10 years. He visited every country, walked around all the valleys and mountains, and finally, he came to the shore of the ocean. The sad elven prince looked at the large boulders that were washed by the dark waves. He sat on one of them and decided to give himself to the ocean, for he didn't find his happiness on earth. Suddenly, he saw a harp seal climbing onto his stone. Her fur was beautifully white. She let out a happy sigh and buried her wet nose in the chest of her fiancé. The prince looked at the harp seal and saw the tears pouring from her brown eyes. Then the prince understood who was in front of him. Joyfully he hugged his bride, kissed her wet nose, and the spell was immediately broken. Angelica turned into a maiden, and her brothers also acquired their human form. As soon as the brothers became people, they kissed their mermaids, whom they had long loved. And the mermaids turned back into maidens. Together they went to the king, and there was the evil stepmother. As she saw that the spell had been broken, she stamped her foot, went to the balcony, and cursed the witch. And as you know, evil has a keen hearing. The angry witch appeared before her and turned the queen and her daughter into sea urchins. The royal guards looked for them, but didn't find. The king was so delighted at the return of his children, and meeting the 6 princesses his sons loved. He threw a grand feast. And his 6 sons married the 6 princesses, and his beloved daughter Angelica married her faithful elven prince. And the dress of each princess was more beautiful than magic flowers, and life was sweeter than honey kisses.